I'm Christina Rhea, and welcome to Breaking Out of Breaking In, a practical filmmaking podcast about taking your creative career into your own hands and making great work that gets seen without playing the Hollywood game.
Or at least while changing the rules. I'm Bri Castellini, your other co-host, and today we are breaking down our year and our final season, at least for now, of Breaking Out of Breaking In, the podcast. I'm going to do a quick housekeeping update about our Patreon in a little bit, but before that, just to anchor us in time once again, we are recording this episode on December 5th, 2023. Probably a myriad of horrible things have happened since then. Certainly, horrible things are happening right now.
Yeah.
So, you know, since we're able to record this in more real time than we ever have, it feels once again relevant to mention when we are.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked a little bit more in length last episode about like the specifics of what's going on in Israel-Palestine right now. Things continue to be bad. There was a ceasefire for a little bit, kind of, but not really.
I mean, it was like cruel torture more than anything. I think personally, I've come to the conclusion that we already live under the fascism that we fear when our reps are ignoring 80% of their constituents' demand for ceasefire. Literally no one has ever gotten their freedom by asking politely from their oppressors. And so being disruptive is the objective. There's no such thing as like peacefully protesting. There's nonviolent protests, but the whole point of a protest is to be disruptive, to make sure that business cannot go on as usual.
Right. Like everyone seemed to somewhat understand this during the strikes. Like the point of the strikes is that it's inconvenient, that it is disrupting a pipeline.
Oh my God. Well, don't even get me. Like in terms of the strikes, all the people who were like, damn the man and all for solidarity when it was about their paycheck, but then all the fucking people
but that's what I'm saying.
It's like silent. Yeah.
Right. Like people get it when it's like close to home and when it's specific to them. But then like to apply the exact same logic and circumstances to protest, to political action, like suddenly everyone's like, I've never met her. What? It's like, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, guys. At least be consistent. Like, the hypocrisy is one of the things that I can't.
Me too.
I just can't with.
Well, especially with our industry, people who, like, you know, tell stories about revolution and about liberation and about, you know, being for the people and are about, like, empathy and love to pat themselves on the back about their inclusion and how they cast with diversity in mind. And it's, like, all just buzzwords and bullshit. But when it actually comes down to standing for people and standing against oppression, they don't say shit. I do think art matters so much because it's what gives people hope. It's what allows them to imagine a world beyond what we currently live in, a better world. It allows, obviously, to spread empathy and all of that. But like when you look at all of these artists being silent and just like towing the line and prioritizing themselves individually over the collective of people in society and humanity, then it's like, fuck art and artists, you know, like it makes me just feel like, oh, what we do doesn't matter if this is us collectively as artists in our industry. Like we are the biggest empathy spreaders as filmmakers and television writers and actors and all of that, because we embody humanity and we reflect society at various times, and like we have so much power, and to see people just not respecting what that power means. It's not sides. It's not about taking sides. It's like channeling it towards the goodness and the betterment of humanity, like objectively. Having them not do that and choose like fear and silence and, well, I want my career, so I'm going to pander to these people in power. It's just sickening, and so just like has made me feel, I don't know. We'll get into it, I guess, as we talk more about our respective careers in this episode, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of our respective careers, this is the last episode of Breaking Out of Breaking In, at least for the foreseeable future. We have, in theory, plans to come back at some point. We'll talk about this in a little bit. But with that, as you guys know, I usually start episodes with a plug for our Patreon, patreon.com/breakingoutpod. And as a result of us going on let's say, an extended hiatus, we will be pausing our Patreon as of December 30th, 2023, because since this is our last podcast episode, we will not be regularly releasing Patreon content. However, there's still a lot of great stuff on that Patreon. So as you know, for the last 3 seasons, we have released bonus content for every single episode that we have recorded of this podcast over on Patreon. So if you want access to that entire backlog, plus some bonus podcast episodes that were never released to our main feed, including one video podcast, you can subscribe at the $3 tier, and that will still work. You can still subscribe. So if you're listening to this far in the future, presumably our Patreon is still up. So you can still subscribe to a paused Patreon in order to access the backlog, and it'll now just function as a one-time kind of shop for access to those archives, and we're hoping to keep that available as long as possible, but you won't be charged going forward. So like if you subscribe at the $3 level or the $1 or the $10 or whatever, we'll get that subscription money, but we will not continue collecting it because the active like subscription will be paused. So hopefully that makes sense. It'll function as a one-time purchase. We reserve the right to relaunch the Patreon someday, especially if we continue with the podcast someday, but you will be like alerted if that ever happens, so that if you decide later on to cancel your membership, then you are absolutely within your rights to do so. And for those of you who are already our patrons, thank you so much for the support over the years. We really appreciate it. And you will also not be charged going forward. So if you were one of our current Patreon subscribers, I think you have already been charged for the last time, if I'm doing my math correctly. By the time this episode comes out, I think you will have been charged one last time already for access to like this stuff. But you will not be charged in 2024 at all, unless we decide to restart the podcast at some time. So like, if you want to maintain access to the archives, you should stay subscribed. And we will definitely let you know, as will Patreon, if we ever plan to start charging again. And to recap, you can subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/breakingoutpod to access 3 years of archival templates, infographics, and curated bonus links. But if you're a new subscriber, you will only be charged when you subscribe, not monthly. If you have any questions about this, if this explanation was not helpful to you, please feel free to email us at breakingoutofbreakingandpod@gmail.com, and we are happy to answer any questions there. So that's the Patreon update. Christina, did that make sense to you?
Yeah, it did.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, I've convinced one person that I know how to explain things. Perfect. So,
also, I guess like episode. I don't think people realize. I don't know if we announced at the beginning of this season that it would be our last. Is this new information to people? I feel like,
I don't know. I feel like we've made like oblique references to it, but maybe that's just in like private times, because I've definitely like told people,
me too,
like other filmmakers and stuff. But yeah, I don't know. So sorry if this is a surprise, but this, I mean, it can't be that much of a surprise. We went from bi-weekly to monthly.
Yeah. And I just people released their Spotify Wrapped. Spotify. Mm-hmm. People were releasing their Spotify Wraps, and we were like showing up as number 1 or number 2 or on their top 5 of podcasts, and I thought that was really lovely, and like I'm so appreciative of that.
Yeah.
And so I imagine for some people it feels like a loss. Maybe not for everyone, but for our diehard fans, maybe. And I want to thank them for listening over these 3 years and hope that, I don't know, I don't really know what I hope, but I think it's clear that because Bri and I haven't made anything, since 2020, basically, we haven't actually been in production, that there just isn't much for us to talk about. And we've talked to all these wonderful guests, and we don't want to, we've said this before, we don't want to just be like every other filmmaking podcast where we just have like a filmmaker on to talk about their latest project every episode. Like, though this
was never meant to be an interview podcast.
Yeah, exactly. And like,
that's not the format.
Right. And that's just, there are ones already doing that. And like, you should listen to those if that's what you want. That's not what we want it to be. It didn't make sense. And I think if we continued, it would just be me and Bri, like, bitching about politics, probably, which I don't think any of our listeners like want to listen to. Like, also just have a call with us if that's what you want. Like, we're happy to do that, one-on-one. But yeah, it's just a lot of work to be editing the podcast and releasing and keeping up with the hosting fees and everything beyond what's the archive for a podcast that isn't doing what we set out to do at this time. But,
Right. And also so much of what, like, season 1, I think, really took the wind out of the sails for season 2 and 3, even though we've had some of, like, I think, in my opinion, our best episodes the past 2 seasons, because season 1 was so comprehensive.
Yeah.
Which was originally what we set out to do, is create, like, a comprehensive, real talk podcast about craft, about the industry, about, building community in film and artistry. And, like, we really struggled to come up with new ideas after that, because, like, we'd covered everything. Certainly everything that we felt that we personally could, like, add to the conversation about. And I'm really proud of the episodes that we've put out. But yeah, until the two of us get new experience or are working on something that might be valuable as a case study to listen to, like, we've done what we set out to do, and we'd rather end it now rather than devolve into, like, a weird hybrid podcast where we complain about politics and cowardly industry people and just sort of ramble for half an hour.
Right. I think, like, this idea that podcasts should go on forever is, I don't know, like, most podcasts I stopped listening to after a while, because it's like, if it was a rewatch, like, they rewatch the show and that's that. And I don't necessarily want to hear them talk about another thing. And so I think for us, it's like recognizing when there isn't any real meat to the thing anymore. And
right. Well, and also, like, we both we're busy with other things. We, we didn't have an editor this season, which definitely made the experience less fun.
Yes.
But, you need money to pay an editor. Yeah. And Ezra Lee was amazing, and we were so glad to work with him throughout season 2. But we couldn't afford him anymore because we didn't have as many Patreon subscribers. But we also didn't have time to, like, really dedicate to, like, let's build this as a business. Because I think that we played around with that a little bit, but that was never a priority for either of us. Especially when, like, I had a full-time job, when you were really busy with Midnight Harvest and like moving and all that kind of stuff. Like, it was never the right time, and also was never really our intention. Like, we didn't necessarily want to build, like, an education empire.
Yes.
If it had happened, I think we would have figured it out. But, like, ultimately, without this being financially meaningful and us able to, like, divest from the editing portion of everything, they're just, like, on a personal level, I'm glad that we did it. I'm also really glad to not be doing it for the foreseeable future.
I also think whenever we would ask people what they wanted to talk about, it was always so specific to what they're trying to figure out, and then it started to kind of dawn on us, like, these people should just be coming to us for consultations, like, this isn't something that we could just talk broadly about necessarily, or we have talked broadly already, and now they're asking, like, hyper-specific follow-up questions. And so, it's like, Bri and I both do consulting, and Bri especially now that Bri is full-time freelancing, so, like, if you want specific advice, go to her and set up a session with her.
BriCastellini.com/consultations. So, like, I mean, our email will remain open and we will be able to access it. So, like, if you ever have questions, like, email us and we will direct you to the correct person for consulting. And I don't know where on social media I'm really active these days, but like, if you have questions, we're still going to be available. Absolutely. Just not in this regular audio format that we have to edit and do a bunch of bells and whistles to. So, we will remain available. We will remain talking about these things, but just the podcast itself is ending.
Yep.
And I don't for now, until we do our 2023 recap, I don't really have anything else to say about it. I'm really happy we were here. I loved making a podcast with Christina. I love making a podcast for all of you wonderful people, our patrons especially, but everyone who listened and shared and showed off how often they listened. We love you very much. We are so happy that we got to do this with you. And we're also happy to end this on our terms, in my opinion, going out strong.
I agree. Yeah.
So Christina, how was 2023 for you?
You know, it was a mixed bag. I went into the second half of the year really excited about experiencing fall, and then all of fall was our country funding a genocide. So it made it really hard to like be in the moment and to unplug. And that's like, I'm not complaining that was like, oh, poor me, I couldn't, you know, enjoy the leaves in my yard because of the awfulness happening on our tax dollars. Like, you know, it was fine. All things considered.
Acknowledging the cognitive dissonance of just like, being alive in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. I, you know, one thing that I think I really have gained from the last few months has been in renewed appreciation for social media and the power of social media. I was like, I started this year so like ready to completely delete my entire existence online, if anyone recalls. Part of me, I went through like a phase when I really started speaking out for Palestinians and for Gaza. Part of me like regretted that I kicked out all of my Instagram followers that I didn't know and went private, you know, over a year ago, because I wish I had been able to reach more people, and like I got harassed a lot, but I also did change some hearts and minds when I was like at the early stages of trying to give people grace for not realizing that they'd only been sold propaganda and didn't know the other side. And now I'm just angry and yelling at everyone and unfollowing anyone who like hasn't at least posted a ceasefire. So, well, at least anyone white, you know, not everyone I feel needs to be vocal on their platforms, but I think certain people definitely should and have not, unfortunately. But anyway, the point is like, that's been a shift for me, that I've made my account public again, and I've really like owned the power of my voice in that way. And just like I got after 2020, I felt like social media was so performative, and so many of the people who were like pretending to have done work over summer 2020 were clearly showing that they were just like full of shit and were just like jumping on a bandwagon and performing. And so I just lost any sense of like, what this is all only bad, it can't be good. That was like my feeling. And then reminding myself, particularly in this moment where like our mainstream news is literally airing propaganda and lies because we want to profit off of gas that's under Gaza. And it is just like the Iraq war and how people were lied to after that. But at that point in time, social media didn't exist. And so you didn't get to see the various civilians that were being bombed and killed for the sake of oil. And like, social media has been it's been so hard to watch, but it has given us like a front row seat to what our country has always done and always been. And like, that has reminded me that social media is so important. And though yes, is like incredibly flawed and can be hard to find a balance with, like I'm definitely struggling with unplugging for my own mental health while still staying completely in the know, you know, and advocating as much as I can. So it does definitely have all of its negatives. It does have this incredible power that I've been reminded of. And now I've been like, you know what? I really want to be famous just for the sake of being able to be so loud that I get blacklisted. Like, that's my new aspiration. I went from like not wanting to be perceived to like wanting to be so perceived that I get silenced like that, because I want this window in time where I can just like speak truth to power on a massive scale. So I think I don't know what that says for like my own mental health, and if that's a healthy place to be in, but I don't know, it's given me like some level of renewed ambition back towards like the hustle of my career in a way. But yeah, I don't know how to like talk about this whole second half of the year without bringing up all the awfulness, so that's just a reality.
Sure. Is there anything you can share about your film? Because there's been some behind the scenes updates, but I don't know how much you can actually talk about yet.
After the writer's strike ended, we did have a meeting and we talked about the budget. We talked about a timeline, and it kind of, I don't know, I had like it was disappointing because I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that I'm going to have to wait a whole other year to make the film, because it is set in fall, and though you know, most of it is set at night and it could be cheated, most of it is also set inside. It could be cheated just based on the timeline of even the SAG strike. Like, we technically don't even have the vote. I think that's like the deadline is today, right? December 5th.
I think it is actually, yeah. December 5th is the deadline.
So who knows by the time this episode comes out what the status of that'll be. But based on how many projects from the like spring, summer, fall, and possibly even into the winter got paused for this year, presumably those will take up the bulk of next year. And so just based on like actor availability, it makes sense that we're looking at sticking to fall. Maybe it's earlier fall than, you know, would have been the case if we had moved forward this year, but still, it's like a year. So in some ways it was nice to have like a meeting again and to have progress. Like, we were finally able to make some offers to actors, and we haven't heard back yet. That literally happened last week. Like Friday, I think. So I don't know what the status will be by the time this episode airs, but that's like, it's cool that we're at that stage where we're actually making offers. But it was also disappointing to have to like hunker down in my mind and be like, okay, another year of this waiting, which again, in the grand scheme, not that big of a deal. Yeah, it's just been weird talking about casting, you know, especially at a time when so many people are being silent about genocide in our industry. It's made me...
Or being not silent
or
in
not, and
the
being
opposite way from what we want.
Correct, being just awful. Yeah, it's really weird because I have no power. I have zero power at the end of the day. And actors, you know, it's such a different thing for me and how I typically make films, because I'm all about like this communal feeling and vibing with people, and then like chemistry testing and holding auditions and trying to like cast the best people for the role with the resources that I have, and also who feel like people I'd want to work with. And this is like totally different in that it's who's going to help us secure the financing. And yes, they should feel good for the role based on their acting ability. And it's interesting because like every name that's on the table is a good actor. So it's not like I'm going to end up with a bad actor.
Right.
Whereas
They're not
like
forcing you to cast like a TikTok person who wants to get into acting.
Right. And undeniably probably better actors than if I were like holding auditions and trying to find unknowns, even though that is like more exciting to me, discovering, like, quote unquote discovering people, like giving people their quote unquote big break. That's just like not the reality, because I'm the like unknown in this scenario, so I don't have the power to bring in unknowns. It's exciting, the prospect of working with people who I admire for their craft and I already know are really good in thinking about what they could bring to a role. But it's also weird because, you know, yeah, like people who are already famous and have public opinions and stuff, like, I don't know, it becomes so much more of a business where it's like, oh, these are my colleagues. Like, we're not a film family. We're not making a movie as a group with a collective mission. We're like working on this small business together for this window of time. And I am trying to like do it to the best of my ability creatively and ethically and all of that, but like I have such little power. And so it's weird because like, and not even outside of the Gaza thing, like there was a name on a list early on for one of the roles, and then domestic abuse charges came out for that person. And it's like, that could happen if I cast an unknown, and probably is more likely to happen after the movie comes out, and then like they're now more
when
famous.
There's, like, scrutiny.
Right, there's scrutiny.
Yeah.
But at least in that world where like I cast the person, I held auditions and I cast them, it was because I like thought they were the best person for the role, not because they were the name that would get me money. And so it's such a weird, like, it's always a risk. It's always a risk attaching people who you don't know. You don't, like, people can seem really great and then not be great, you know? And it's no one's fault. Like, if you're trying to, it's like if you hire someone for a company, you can't ask their political views. But then if they like suddenly turn out to be this warmongering awful person, like, what can you do? And so it's just, but it's like, I don't know, it's this gray area because film is so, storytelling is so like intertwined with your real life, and like celebrity culture is just so, I don't know, like messy and whatever. So it's just a new world that I'm navigating, and I'm learning a lot. I'll say that. But it's mostly good stuff. It's mostly good in the sense that there's forward momentum. In a world where people are being like, you know, fired from projects or dropped by their reps for calling a genocide, which is wild. Like, that's the world that we're in. I'm trying to think about what power I do have, and like the power I have is to choose my department heads, you know. And so I'm telling a story that has subtext that, though is not specific to the current awfulness of the world, it is thematically relevant to the general awfulness of American culture and capitalism and colonization and all of that. And so I'm trying to, you know, get this film made because I think it matters, not just to me, and trying to empower people who would otherwise not be given opportunity through the hiring decisions that I do have. So it's a monster movie. I don't know if I've ever said that. Also, you said the new title at the beginning.
You definitely have.
Okay. You said the new title at the beginning, Midnight Harvest, which I don't think I've said before. I've always referred to it as Silent Night, but that's its current working title. So we hired an illustrator to design the monster, to be part of the pitching process as we go out to financing. And that's been, you know, I haven't seen it yet. That was also just this week, actually, that we spoke with an illustrator. So I'm excited to see that. It starts to make it feel a little bit more real. But, you know, it's Hollywood, so
yeah,
just be like, it's not real until it's real. It's not real until we're on set, right?
Right.
And
even then they might shelve it,
right? Totally,
so that they can get the tax write-off.
Oh God, I know.
And then even if it's on streaming, they can remove it after a week because all the new subscribers are already there.
I know. This whole industry is just so fucked. But I'm excited that it at least feels more real than it did. You know, I started working with the production company that I'm working with on this film almost 2 years ago. It's been over a year and a half. So then it was just script notes, and then at the beginning of this year, we finally got out of the note stage, and then right when we were going to start pitching for financing and to actors, the strike happened, and now it actually does feel like we have a budget breakdown, we have a tentative shooting schedule, we have hopefully this illustration coming. We've got offers out to some actors that will hopefully like it and will help us secure the financing. But, you know, so it starts to feel a little bit more real, but I'm still in this stage of like, it's been a learning experience. I'm grateful to be at this stage, to be having meetings with the people that I'm having meetings with, to be given the opportunity to get to talk about directing this movie. And I hope it happens, but I'm also, you know, just being like cautiously optimistic, I guess, because it's like a lot can change in a year, you know. A lot changed over this year. So
I was gonna say, like, a lot has changed over a year.
Yeah. But you know, we've been writing stuff together, which we'll talk about. I've been writing other stuff.
I was just gonna say, luckily you have other stuff going on.
Yeah,
so, like,
I have other projects that I'm sure. Like but I just want to say, like, I'm trying to think about what's next.
Sure.
whether it is like after I make this film or after I've explored the entire process of trying to make this film, it's not my only egg in my basket the way that I feel like it was last year. So
Sure.
that's good.
Cool. Do you want to talk about any of those other things that you're working on outside of the one that we spent an hour and a half talking about last month?
Yeah. Well, so I've been really, after our co-writing experience, I just really liked co-writing. I think that's been a revelation of this year, is how fun co-writing can be when you're on the same page, obviously, and you have a similar style and everything. So Kelsey and I did a revision of a feature that we did a rough first draft of in 12 hours when she was at an airport last year. We did a full revision. It's called Baby Moon. It's a horror film as well. And then Ryan, I had this idea. I was riding my bike and I had this kind of creepy encounter, and that gave me an idea for a new feature. And then, kind of friend of the pod, I've mentioned him, Ryan Kramer, he came to visit and I was telling him about it, and he gave me like a backstory idea, and I was like, you know what, why don't we write it together? And so we just finished a draft of that, our first draft. It's called Buck. And yeah,
Have
also
you noticed that all of them are B names?
I know. I don't know what it is
Breaking
about
In,
me and
Baby
B
Moon and Buck.
titles.
I mean, it's like my M thing when we were writing Breaking In, and like every character I got to name had an M name.
Yes.
Sometimes
Totally.
writers just get stuck on a letter.
Yes, yeah.
It happens.
But yeah, so but both of those projects are smaller, and like I'm excited about both. They're very different. Baby Moon is like atmospheric. It's like very especially
haunting.
you haven't read the it's a haunting, and you haven't read the new draft, but it's tighter, but it's still like it's very unnerving, but it's not like pulsating in any way. And then Buck is like all adrenaline, like edge of your seat the whole time. So I'm excited, but both are very theoretically producible where I live now for, not like a crowdfunding campaign kind of budget, but
Sure.
like, definitely an ultra low budget contract situation. It's interesting that like I have this huge project that has turned into a multi-million-dollar film that I hope to get to make, but then like everything I've written has been like trying to go back to my roots a little bit, but like my hope is that I can make small projects still, but have like money on the other side to actually pay everyone extremely well, because I've made this bigger film that I do, that I've been wanting to make for like 8 years now. So I do very much love this story, and I really am desperate to make it, but also I've a little bit realized like how hard it is to get a project of this size when you want to retain like you want to, you've written it and you want to be the director and you want to like have it be your movie. It's so hard to get that size project off the ground with just the way Hollywood does everything. But yeah, so, and even like Breaking In is a bigger film, but it's still something we could do for under $1 million for sure.
Oh, 100%. Because like there's not really stunts. There's like one or two things that like would require some level of something. But like I'm thinking like the cold open and then that eventual full scene and that kind of thing. Like that's probably going to be very special effects heavy.
Yeah.
But outside of that, it's mostly just like locations and cast is the big price point of that film.
Yeah, I mean, it is like, it's a very indie movie with the exception of very large crowd shots, like scattered throughout. And that there are a lot of characters. Not to say that you can't do a lot of characters on like a small budget, like About a Donkey. We had like fucking 9 main characters in that movie, but it is very hard. So
Yeah.
and like also we had to cut so much and whatever. So I would say it's probably, we could do it. We could do it on, I think, an ultra low budget as well. It's just like on the higher end of that.
Any of our super rich listeners, if you want to keep hearing from us, maybe you should fund our movie.
Yeah.
And we have a pitch
I don't
deck
think
now, so which you can access on Patreon at the $3 tier.
Yes.
Patreon.com/breakingoutpod.
What about you, Bri? What have you been writing?
Writing, still not writing scripts except for Breaking In. That was the only script that I worked on this year. Well, no, that's not true. I wrote a really bad half-hour maybe comedy. It would be comedy if I made it good, but it's not good. And then I've written half of 2 novels. I'm hoping by the end of this month I will have finished one of them because I did win NaNoWriMo again this year. I hit my 50K mark on November 28th. So I finished early. Ha! And that one's is me trying to write something really kind of tropey and very not like myself. So it's called Rehabbing the Billionaire, and it's a billionaire and his assistant marriage of convenience story. So like very tropey. So many tropes. And it's about a CEO of a physical therapy like rehab corporation and his assistant who needs to go back to school to become a physical therapist herself. So they get married when he's trying to finish this big business deal. It doesn't matter the details. And his reputation as a playboy is like coming out, and it might affect his deal. And so he and the assistant get married of convenience so that he will pay for her school and she will help him like rehab his image. And, as like a married man, he's much more calm now that he has a wife, all that kind of like patriarchal garbage. And so it's been me trying to kind of find my way through a third person narrative, which I haven't written in probably 15 years. I'm a very first person narrative kind of girl. And also like finding my version of these like very tropey, very like common concepts and seeing like, is there something new in here? Is there something that I could play with? So it's been kind of one big grand experiment, but I've been having fun with it. I will never write in third person again. Not ever. But I'm glad I had the experience. So hopefully that'll be done by the end of this year. I'm probably 2/3 of the way through, so that's happening. And then I wrote half of another book throughout the rest of the year, which I really like, but which I have been weirdly resistant to outlining, which makes it hard for me as the kind of writer I am to finish it. That one's called Headwaters, and it's a road trip romance about 2 people who are lying to each other at the start of the road trip for different reasons. And I really like it. It's very vibey and atmospheric for a writer that I am that is not either of those things. So like it's been a challenge in its own way, but that one I didn't adhere to any kind of structure, so I've just been kind of like going on this road trip with them, and like anytime I'm in the car I listen to the playlist I made for this book, and I'm always thinking about this book, but I haven't quite nailed like bit by bit what's happening, so it's been a much longer journte. But those are the things I've been writing. So a lot of very different stuff this year.
Yeah. That does remind me that I've wrote a short story this year.
Oh my god, you did. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, thanks to Bri, really. I mean, I had written this short, but it was too long for a short. It was like almost 30 pages. The original draft was 17 pages, but then I kept adding to it because I just found more.
Well, you were developing it as a pilot at that point, I feel like.
I was developing it as a pilot at that point, but it was like an anthology, sort of like a horror anthology in a way. So every episode would have been like a long short. It wasn't necessary, and they would have been unified by a location, but it wasn't like an ongoing story. But I just always, because it is about a little girl, a 12-year-old girl experiencing a haunting with her cat, it always felt a little bit hard to envision ever getting to even make it, because the cat is such a like part of the story, this very emotive part of the story. And somewhere along the way, I don't remember where the idea first came about. I think it was even last year, because I wrote it way back in, I think 2020. It started as something that I wrote because it's an idea that I always had because it's something inspired by something that happened to me when I was 12, but I never wrote it. And then I had a staffing opportunity back in 2020, so I decided to write it as, a spec for this particular show that was a horror anthology. Yeah, and then I just kept making it longer because I wanted it to be the right length. But yeah, so then somewhere along last year, I decided maybe I should try and make it a short story, and then I just like didn't forever until it might have been August, maybe. I think August, I just suddenly, I'd been reading so much, and also I hadn't read your first book yet, but it was like in my inbox. And for whatever reason, I was like, you know what, I'm going to try this. So then I turned it into a short story and sent it to Bri, and Bri like totally kicked my ass. And was like...
It's like the only time I've ever been able to do that with Christina, so I'm honored to have gotten the opportunity.
Yes. Bri was like, you're a screenwriter who has just like turned it into third person sort of narration. Like it was just me being a screenwriter, not fully prepared to like get inside the head of the character.
You just wrote your screenplay in prose form, which is
correct.
Not what adapting is.
Right.
And it was
yeah.
still like there was obviously potential. Like you were right that there's a lot of potential in it in prose. But yeah, the first draft was definitely a screenplay that you reformatted as prose.
Yeah. But thanks to Bri like being really hard, she like went through with notes and was like, oh yeah, what does it mean that she furrowed her brows? Like, that's a visual thing, but like, what is she thinking? Like, it was just like all of notes like that. I was like, okay, I get it. I got inside 12-year-old me's head and wrote a better draft, and then Bri gave more notes, and then I ended up with a short story that is just under 5,000 words, and I'm quite happy with it, and I think it works a lot better as a short story because in general, but also once I got inside of my main character's head, like, it's just so much more enjoyable. Because I think the thing is that I loved this character that I had created. I mean, part of that is maybe my own narcissism, but like, because she is based on 12-year-old me. But I just loved this like spunky 12-year-old that I had put into this situation, and I wanted to bring it to life. And I didn't feel like a screenplay would ever happen with a screenplay. So anyway, yeah. So
actors are tough. Animal actors are tough. Like,
yes.
The things that you can get away with in prose give you a lot more freedom to let both of those characters shine without having to worry about the complications of set.
Right. And performance. Like, yeah, I mean, so now I'm just submitting it to magazines and stuff, and that's like been a whole new world that I've learned a lot from Bri and really Quinn by extension.
Yeah.
And yeah, so like maybe it won't get published. I hope it will. I want it to be out there for people to read. I don't know if I'll write any more prose. It was so against everything I know about writing in terms
your
of
instincts.
Like, my instincts. Like it was had to really and I fear I don't know how you go back and forth, because I fear that I would get too comfortable in prose and then have these really bad habits to break in screenwriting again, where I'm just like over explaining shit and writing in the wrong tense and whatnot. So
I mean, to be fair, I haven't gone back and forth very much.
I mean, you did with Breaking In, though.
Yeah, but that was a co-written thing. And I, like, this isn't maybe fair to Breaking In, but, like, Breaking In, because it wasn't an easy thing to write, but it also was, because it was, we had done such a good job with conceptualizing it and with it being so us, even though it wasn't us literally. Like, I don't know, Breaking In didn't even feel like writing a screenplay to me. It just felt like I'm telling a fun story with my friend Christina, and it's in screenplay format. But I will also say that, like, and I think you noticed this in a couple places in my first book, which you read, is that, like, I kind of write prose like I do screenwriting. Like, there's a lot of dialogue. And I sometimes don't describe locations or people because I don't care, and because I am definitely still in the phase of, like, having been, when the last time I went from prose to screenplays, people being like, you're over directing in action, which I know both of us have issues with, but that's also because we're now directors. So that's been my, like, oh, I'm a director now, so I can write directing notes in my script. It's fine. And it's not, I'm a prose writer writing screenplays. Whoops. So yeah, I will say that I'm not great at going back and forth.
Sure. Well, so you're really a great prose writer. I loved your book, and I hope it gets published and that you have more opportunity to keep writing. I personally don't think I'm a prose writer. However, I do really love this short story, and I think it is quite good. And it's called Little Whispers. Really good. Thank you. So hopefully someone likes it. It's a hard sell because it's, like, not YA, but it is about a 12-year-old. So, like, but it's set, in 2001 when I was 12. So it's for, like, nostalgic millennials, but it's not for 12-year-olds to read right now. So I don't know. I don't, and so I think it's creepy, but it's not like so disturbing that I think it would do well in like a horror magazine, but it also is undeniably a horror story. So like I don't think regular magazines will publish it. So I don't know. I've been submitting just things, and I hope that it finds a home. Maybe, you know, whenever we do like a reunion episode of our podcast, I'll talk about it.
Yeah. Or who knows, maybe we could record like an audiobook version and like release that on the feed. Like somebody reading it out loud.
True. That's true. Maybe. Then you'd have to cast a little girl or someone who sounds like a little girl.
I feel like there's a lot of talented voice actors. We interviewed a voice actor who probably has recommendations.
Yeah. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, in terms of other writing news from me, I have been querying my first book, which is now called Pulling Focus, thanks to the focus group of a handful of writers who read it because my original title was not really accurate to what the book was. So I've been querying Pulling Focus to mostly agents, but a handful of like publishers directly. Nobody wants it. I've gotten over, I think I'm almost at 60 hard no's, like confirmed no's, and probably 15 to 20 like I haven't heard back, so I assume it's a no. And I'm running out of people on Query Manager is the platform that I use to like find people to query. I think I'm running out of people to send it to who because I'm querying as many people as I can find. So that's been challenging because I feel really good about the book, and I, every iteration of it, every time a friend has read it and given me notes, like it gets better and better. And I really am really proud of this book, and I feel like it is perfectly marketable in context of what else is out there right now. And I have read over 420 romance novels this year. I know what's out there, and I just gotta find my person, because I haven't yet. So if anyone knows literary agents, please send them my way. The big news for me that we didn't actually get to talk about in our mid-year update because it happened like a week after we uploaded the episode is that I got laid off this year. So we are now both ex-Seed and Sparkers, and I think I can speak for both of us when I say thank God for that. I don't think I've been subtle about feelings about our former workplace. I also want to be clear that like my feelings about our former workplace have nothing to do with being laid off. Frankly, the fact that they laid me off and allowed me to collect unemployment as a result is the kindest thing that company possibly ever did for me, certainly in the last couple of years. And, I don't want to go full hater on our final episode of this podcast, but it has definitely been freeing to not be there. It sucked that I, no longer have regular income or health insurance. It is what it is. But I am genuinely grateful to have been laid off for a lot of reasons. And if I can share some advice to anyone who's like expecting to get laid off, because nobody really expects to get laid off, but like if I can give you some advice of things that I'm glad that I did prior to getting laid off, they are to regularly archive emails of people that you have good relationships with. Especially if you have like a separate work email that is connected to your company. Because like as of like 48 hours after getting laid off, I did not have access to my email anymore. And for a little while, I think they were just forwarding my emails to my former manager. And so like if things came through, she would forward stuff to me because she and I were on good terms, certainly. But that might not be the case for you. So like if you have a rapport with like a partner or with a client or like with somebody, have a like way to capture those emails separate from your work account, so that you don't lose touch with them when you maybe unexpectedly or maybe not unexpectedly stop working at that company. The same is true for your work product. Like ever since like a couple of years ago when I stopped working with Starable, I got really, really specific about archiving work product. Not only because like sometimes, even if you like have published work on behalf of a former company, that doesn't mean that that's going to stay up forever. Like Starable's forum went down, and after I left, because like they didn't have anyone to moderate it, and like they changed their business model, and there was a lot of work content that I had on that forum that I didn't capture prior to leaving, because I kind of just assumed it would still be up. It was on the internet. But when they shut down their forum, all of that content is gone. And so I was much smarter, thankfully, for Seed and Spark, where I, like, any blog that I wrote, any documentation that I created, like things that were my product, I kept just so that I knew, you know, I could refer back to it and refer people to it. And like, I can't publish it as my own until Seed and Spark goes under or whatever, but like, I have it. So like, no matter what happens on the internet at that company, I have access to the things that I spent 4 years working on, which has been very useful in adapting my own stuff. Also, savings are important. Have a savings account if you can. When I got laid off I didn't get laid off from MTV. They just didn't pick up my contract, which is functionally the same thing when all of your employees are on 3-month contracts. But when I lost my job at MTV, I had like no savings. I had like a month and a half of savings. And, you know, some of that wasn't my fault. I was a 24-year-old in New York City. I had just graduated from grad school and had to start paying back student loans suddenly. So like, you know, didn't have a lot to go around, but I certainly wasn't as careful as I could have been in saving and like being cautious. And thankfully this time around I had a good chunk of savings, so that was huge. And then finally, the best thing that I did while at Seed and Spark is that I didn't give them everything. Especially once Christina left, because Christina was head of education, I kind of like took over that role sort of, and I was developing a bunch of classes on their behalf and like developing a bunch of documentation and processes and educational events and stuff. And it got to a point where like people were really excited that we had all these new offers. And I was asked to develop a couple of new classes that I ultimately declined to do because I knew, it wasn't really in our business to do that. Like they wanted me to develop like directing classes and like, you know, first time director classes and things like that. And I said no, because one, I was already teaching stuff outside of Seed and Spark that kind of covered that. And I didn't want to use the stuff that I was paid elsewhere for to be absorbed into the Seed and Spark brand and then never be able to touch it again once I left Seed and Spark one way or another. But also I knew that there were classes that I wanted to develop for like Breaking Out of Break Again and for potential other work. And I knew that if I developed too much good work product that was just my work that I was doing on behalf of Seed and Spark, if I ever left, I wouldn't be able to access any of that. And I would have to completely redevelop a bunch of stuff. And I didn't want to do that because I wanted to have something that was still mine. And like so much of the education at Seed and Spark now is a result of like you and I's actual filmmaking advice. And like I tried to remove as much of that stuff as I could before I left because like I feel weird about people using my spreadsheet, you know, screenshots to teach. But there's only so much that you can do because like so many of those classes were personal to us. And so I knew I didn't want to give them everything, because then once I left, I would be left with nothing. And if I wanted to continue doing the kind of work that I loved, I couldn't do that to myself. And thank God I did, because now I'm teaching a bunch of new classes for a bunch of different partners, and it's all mine. And the like being cautious about work product that I did on behalf of a larger company and being on good terms with partners is what has allowed me to start my own business. Because like I could have been just fully cut off with nothing and had to start from scratch, but I didn't do that to myself. And I'm really glad that I had the foresight and the prior bad experience to do that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I started my own company. Hire me to consult, hire me to teach at your workshop. I have been connecting with a bunch of people that either I've worked with previously or I've wanted to work with now just as a solo entity. And that's been going pretty well. I mean, it's, you know, December. Nobody wants to work. I don't want to work right now. So certainly it's been slower than I would love, but I've been consulting with people, helping with crowdfunding campaigns and with producing and teaching classes on pitching and all that kind of stuff. And it's been really rewarding, and I'm hopeful. And my ambition for 2024 is to, at the very least, make rent with my side business, with like my business, and supplement that with like other work, which I'm also working on right now. So if you would like to help me pay my rent and also get really great, genuinely low-priced advice about crowdfunding and production, please hire me. BriCastellini.com/consultations.
Yes, hire Bri.
The only other thing that I did this year is I started going to a lot more movies because we live within like a mile and a half of an AMC, and there's really good parking around there. And I've mentioned this on the podcast like a million times, but like I don't go places in LA unless I know that there's good parking, and there's great parking around the AMC near us at Burbank Town Center. So we got I'm on the A list now because I wanted to see more movies, and like it's a good excuse for Quinn and I to get out of the apartment, and like it's a good thing for me to still be like somewhat aware of what's going on in media. So we watched a bunch of movies this year, and there were some really good ones that I was really glad to have seen in theaters. Joyride and Bottoms, I would say, were like my two big ones. Big laughs. Like both. They were so fun. Just such fun movies. I think my best theater experience, though, was the new Mission Impossible movie, because we were in one of the theaters that has like a rumble pack in the seats. And I unironically love Mission Impossible. Tom Cruise is a movie star, and I love that for him. And those movies are exactly what I want them to be. And I hadn't seen one in theaters ever. I'd never seen a Mission Impossible in theaters, and it was so much fucking fun. And it was rumbling, and when a train got derailed, like you thought you were being derailed, it was like, this is the movie experience that I have been missing. I will also say, surprise hit for me was The Holdovers.
I did not yet.
Like, the trailer's not good, but that movie is actually like surprisingly heartwarming and like a really like nice like Christmas movie. I really enjoyed it.
Cool.
I also went to Saltburn last week. That sure was a movie that happened. Gorgeous. But what the fuck? And I am really worried that I'm not going to get to see American Fiction in theaters, because when it comes out, I will be home at my hometown. In my hometown of Colorado, and it's a really small town, and we tend to not get the more like indie, like limited release sort of movies, and I have a feeling that's what American Fiction is going to be, and so I'm really worried that I'm going to miss it in theaters, because that's like I think my most anticipated upcoming movie, at least for the like immediate like month.
Cool.
Yeah, but I saw a lot of movies this year, and it's been really fun.
That's great. Yeah, some of my favorite movies. We talked about favorite movies from the first half of the year. So, second half, I also really loved Joyride and Bottoms. I also loved Theater Camp, which...
Yeah, I think I was like just getting the AMC app at that time, and like we were just too late to see it when you started promoting it to me.
Yeah, it's a really fun one, and it did show for a long time in theaters near me because it was shot near me, so it was like a local gem.
It was not out here as long.
Such a delight. I really recommend it on streaming, whatever.
I was gonna say, is it streaming somewhere?
I think it's on Hulu, which I'm boycotting currently, but I think it's on Hulu.
Yeah, you're right, it is.
Past Lives was lovely. It was just lovely. It was a favorite, a very quiet, bittersweet movie. And I just watched May December. You see that?
Oh, I've heard a lot about that. That's on Netflix, right?
Yeah, it's on Netflix now. I kind of feel like maybe it's my favorite movie of the year, which is really weird because when I first watched it, I was like, I wouldn't have said it was my favorite movie of the year, but I can't stop thinking about it. And that kind of makes me think that it was. And it's one of those movies that's very like in an ethical gray area because it is pulled from a true story so much, and the like victim of that true story, whether he perceives himself as a victim or not, is very gray. He's still alive. His children are obviously still alive. They're only in their 20s. So it's a weird thing. It's very, very pulled from real life. But I found it extremely compelling. Like, it just sucks you in, and the performances across the board were just phenomenal. And particularly Charles Melton plays Joe in the movie. Was just like stole scenes, like a total scene stealer with two like powerhouse performers, Oscar-winning performers. So he was just like heartbreaking, his character, and just like his emotional trajectory was just heartbreaking. Anyway, very, 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 very compelling, very interesting tonally, because it has like some very laugh out loud moments because they're so like jarring, but then it's also like incredibly heartbreaking, and it says a lot about like it's both like, while it is being a problematic entity that is using someone's real life story for like consumption and entertainment, it also is commenting on that like in this very meta way by having this character go to study the person she's going to be playing in a movie and like wreaking havoc with her own narcissism in a very narcissistic existing world already. So like it was just very, very interesting and very like I can't stop thinking about it. So it maybe is my favorite movie, even though it like made me so uncomfortable and just like the real situation just makes me so sick.
That has seemed to be the consensus that I've seen. That movie is like nobody likes watching it, but no one can stop thinking about it, and it thinks it's like genius and also maybe the worst thing that's ever happened, but genius nonetheless. It's like,
yeah,
that's friends, that's cinema. I love that for them.
Totally. Yes. Oh, and you know what I just watched?
What's that?
That I had no idea what it was going in. Reality. It's on exclusively on HBO, I think, because that's what I watched it on, or whatever the fuck it's called now. And
Max.
Yeah. I will only call it HBO the same way I'll only call Twitter. But that movie is about the whistleblower who was from the NSA and told us about Russia interfering in our election, our 2016 election. Mm-hmm. And what makes it a fascinating watch is that the movie is a word-for-word recreation of the FBI interrogation of her when they showed up at her house. And even down to like clearing a throat or like every single pause is from the transcript.
Wow.
And so, and like they was
and that's the whole movie?
The whole movie. It's an audio recording, and it's like it starts where it starts and it ends where it ended. Like that is the movie. And so these actors have to perform and say it exactly the way it was really said, but like they don't know what their body language was, and they have to like make it make sense from a character perspective. But I found it so fascinating because you are literally watching the tactics of the FBI interrogate someone and like how they disarm people, and it was just fascinating. And also, what's her face?
It's Sydney Sweeney.
Yes, Sydney Sweeney, who I had found very funny in, what the hell is the name of that show?
Not Euphoria?
No, The Gays Are Trying to Kill Me. The gays.
Oh, White Lotus.
White Lotus. I'd found her extremely funny in the first season of White Lotus. And she was so funny in that, but I did not think that she had like the serious acting that she exhibits in reality. So despite her incredibly Trumpy family, I was impressed with her. Anyway, I found it really fascinating from this like interesting mix of reality and cinema. And the fact that the person, her name is Reality, is like really interesting.
Reality winner.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was why like it was called Reality. And then the last thing I had on my list for the second half of the year was Talk to Me, which was a horror movie that it came out fairly recently, and it was fun. It was unnerving. It was one of those movies where it's like, I would never do what they're doing. It's like these teenagers start playing with this dead hand that allows a spirit to take over your body for a window of time, but like you have to kick it out, otherwise bad shit can happen if it stays more than like 5 minutes or something. I don't remember the exact amount of time. And then of course one of them accidentally allows it to stay too long. And so it's like you have to suspend. I mean, I guess I could buy that teenagers would do stupid shit like that, but I found it to be, like most movies now, I feel like so many movies are just about generational trauma. Like that's like the new thing that everyone's making a movie about. It's just so millennial of us. But
I was just gonna say it's a very millennial trend.
Yes.
All of us read adult children of emotionally unavailable parents, and yes, we're never gonna be okay again.
Right. So I thought it was a good movie. I mean, it was one of those movies that cast a black woman lead, but it was written by white dudes. And so there's some layers of like, okay, yeah, there's a little bit of like diversity slapped on a white perspective. But it was a good movie. It was a very like good indie horror movie that I enjoyed. So that's it for movies on my list. Well, TV, I have the show I'm a Virgo, which is Boots Riley's new show.
Right.
That was excellent and unlike anything I'd seen. And I just love Boots Riley because I feel like he's an example of someone, one of the very few people who I think get to exist within the Hollywood system, but like he just says whatever the fuck he wants and he calls out the system for being the system and still has a career, and I love that for him and I hope that for more people. And
how is he able to do that? Is he independently wealthy? What's his deal?
I really don't know. I have to look into it more because truly, like, I'm so how he managed to get like this funded, I don't know. Yeah, also his work is like so much about calling out the systems. And yeah, I don't know, but I really appreciate I'm a Virgo. I think you would like it. You should watch it. It's really like a coming of age story, but then sort of like a superhero show, sort of, and very much timely in its themes. And then Deadlock, loved Deadlock. It was, if you've watched anything like Broadchurch, if you watch anything that's like small town murder and like small town detectives have to try and investigate their own town to figure out who the killer is, like this is such a fun meta spin on it. Like it both exists as that thing but is also satirizing that formula and is very subversive and very, very funny. And it's like an almost entire women cast. Like everyone's gay on the show. Like it's just really, really fun. And I loved it. I watched it once by myself and then I watched it again with Justin. And then The Bear season 2. I really liked the first season, but I was kind of like, it's good. I wasn't writing home about it, per se. But then season 2 was excellent. Like I found season 2 to be quite lovely. Like some episodes in particular just really sit with you. I think it's a little bit of a fantasy, but it is a really wonderful look at how you can try and, I don't know if it's really possible, but it's a show where instead of like gentrifying a neighborhood, they like send everyone to get trained so that they can retain their jobs. That was just like a sandwich shop that becomes a fine dining restaurant. And like, it is a really good look at how you can be aspirational and like aspire to have a like quote unquote fancy restaurant in an area if you come from that like isn't fancy, and not just abuse the people that are from that area, but actually like lift them up with you. Again, it's like a little bit of a fantasy, but I think it's a really lovely, like conceptually and really a lovely lesson of what if. Reservation Dogs had their final season, really loved that. It was really moving and had one particular episode that was really excellent. That was like a horror film from the 70s. And Barry also had its last season. And it was very, very, I don't know, I just loved the meta-ness of that show and like how it just kind of like shits on our industry, like all the awful things about it. And then Love Struck, because we both
Starstruck
talked about the first season, I think our first season, and this was the third and final season, and I really did like the ending. I thought the second season was unwarranted. Like the first felt like a standalone and the second was unnecessary and kind of like, it was a little bit like a cash grab, but then season 3 felt very warranted, like in a way, because it was like, okay, well now you've made it not a limited series, so now you need to finish it. And it did something I wasn't expecting and I liked it. And it felt very...
I need to see it.
Yeah.
Truly watch nothing. But this is you listing all these is a good reminder of, I was going to watch that.
You watched Poker Face. I feel like that was one thing you watched, right?
Oh, I did. That was the thing that I watched at home because I got a Peacock subscription. I got a Peacock subscription when my mom had her hip replaced because you had recommended so many things from it. And so we watched that. Oh, we also started watching Girls Five Eva, which I think was my mom's favorite thing that we watched. She really liked that one.
I think we talked about maybe both of them in the mid-year check.
Because that was May was of this year was my mom's hip surgery, so that was when I watched most of the content that I watched this year. Otherwise, I was reading 420 books. So, but I will say, in terms of books, Courtney Milan I think is my favorite new to me author of this year, because I have obviously read lots of authors this year, but I think Courtney Milan, I think, is my favorite new author. She's a historical romance writer. She writes a lot of Asian characters and a lot of queer characters, and her books are like both love letters to romance as a genre and format, and also like striking indictments of it at the same time, which I find really fascinating. Like, she's one of those people who clearly like understands the formula, loves the formula, has read it a long time, and is also like not afraid to critique it within the love for it, which is such a like hard balance. I feel like in any kind of writing is like, if you love something but you want to kind of like point out some inefficiencies or inequalities or whatever, sometimes you can go too far. And I feel like a lot of like TV rom-com, like not TV, but like film rom-coms these days are too self-aware in like a way that's like, aren't these tough? Or like new Disney movies for the same reasons. And I feel like Courtney Milan is the kind of writer who like doesn't go overboard with the like satirizing, because she really does genuinely love the like base formula, but she like heightens it in a way which I find really, really lovely and compelling, and cannot recommend her enough. If anyone wants to start with her, I've almost read her entire backlist, but I will say her Worth family series is my favorite so far.
Cool.
So yeah, Courtney Milan doing it right. She apparently went to war with the Romance Writers of America, calling them out for being like super racist and exclusionary, and like they tried to blacklist her and everyone quit as a result in solidarity. And so she also just sounds like super cool just as a person. But
that
yeah,
cool.
So if you're into historical fiction, she might be the writer for you to start with.
Cool. I might read one of them, because I haven't done any historical fiction, but I might give it a shot. I fell off. I've only really read maybe like 1 or 2 books a month for the second half of the year, when I was on like a 10 book a month streak for the first half. But I've at least continued with at least one a month. So that's better than last year for sure. And I don't really have a favorite of what I read in the second half, at least not that comes to mind, except for this book you may have heard of called Pulling Focus by Bri Castellini.
For a second I didn't know what you were doing, and I was like, have I heard of it? Oh, right, it's me. Somebody publish me, please. I love this book so much.
I do too.
Please.
Yeah, please.
Thank you. I do appreciate you reading it and liking it. Do you have any final thoughts in this final episode of our final season of our podcast?
No, just thank you. Thanks for listening. I hope we've made your journey as a creative a little bit, if not easier, just more bearable.
Less alone?
Yeah, less alone. Less alone. And we're still here, as we said earlier. So find us online. You can always email us, DM us. We're around, and hopefully we will be back in some capacity, even if it's like we do an end of year recap moving forward.
Sure. Or like
We'll
a
see.
case study when we eventually get to, when you make your movie, when we make our movie. Who knows?
Yes. Maybe Bri will do a whole like offshoot when she publishes her book for people who
I am
write prose.
trying to adapt it as a mini series now, as like my writers group is back together and we have to write scripts again. Ugh. So I'm like, all right, well, maybe I'll try to adapt Pulling Focus as like a mini series, like in the vein of like Heartstopper or something like that.
Oh, cool.
So we'll see. We'll see you around, even if we don't see you in the feed.
Yep.
Thank you, everybody. Genuinely, thank you for all the support you've given us the past couple of years.
Yes. Thanks so much to Kelsey Rauber for our theme music, Kaylee Brown for our podcast art, and to all of you for listening these past 3 seasons. Links to learn more about them, as always, is in our episode description.
And thank you to our final season Booby VIPs, Brandy Nicole and Kelsey Rauber, whose continued support in pretty much every area of our lives has meant the absolute world to us. And remember, for everyone else, we are pausing payments on our Patreon, so it's no longer a monthly subscription, but you can still sign up for the $3 tier at any time to access our archive of templates, infographics, and curated links. So access that over on patreon.com/breakingoutpod. Thanks so much for listening.